When we talk about vulnerability, people often assume we're talking about weakness. But that's not what I mean at all. Some of the most capable, intelligent, resilient people become vulnerable not because they're weak, but because life has shifted under their feet. Major life transitions are one of the most common and least talked about moments when narcissistic people gain access to us. Think about any big transition you've gone through: starting college, moving to a new city, getting married, becoming a parent, getting divorced, losing a job, retiring after decades of structure. Even positive changes can be deeply destabilizing. During these periods, your routines are disrupted, your sense of identity is questioned, and your internal compass may feel temporarily off. You're not broken, you're recalibrating. But recalibration looks, from the outside, like uncertainty. And uncertainty is something narcissistic individuals are exquisitely attuned to. During transitions, we naturally look outward. We seek reassurance. We ask for advice. We lean more heavily on others because the old rules no longer apply and the new ones aren't fully written yet. You may be asking yourself, am I doing this right? Or is this who I'm supposed to be now? That questioning is human. But it also opens the door for someone who is eager to answer those questions for you, especially someone who is very comfortable presenting themselves as confident, certain, and authoritative. Narcissistic people love certainty, or at least they love performing it, and when you're in transition, certainty can feel soothing, it can feel grounding. So when someone comes into your life during that period and says, "I've been through this," or "I know exactly what you need," or "Trust me, I can guide you," it can feel like relief. Finally, someone who seems sure when you don't. The problem is that this certainty often isn't about helping you find your footing. It's about positioning themselves as indispensable. They don't encourage exploration, they encourage dependence. They don't say, "You'll figure this out." They say, "You need me to figure this out." And because you're already in a state of flux, that shift can happen quietly, almost invisibly. Let's say you've just moved to a new place. You don't have your usual social network. You're lonely, maybe even a little scared. A narcissistic person may quickly offer themselves as your primary connection. They introduce you to people, but always through them. They help you, but with strings attached. They become the filter through which you experience your new environment. And because you're grateful, because you're still adjusting, you may not notice how small your world is becoming. Or consider a career transition. Maybe you've lost a job or changed fields. Your confidence is shaken. You're questioning your value. Enter someone who flatters your potential while subtly undermining your autonomy. They may say, "You're talented, but you don't always make the best decisions," or "You're lucky to have someone like me looking out for you." It sounds supportive on the surface, but underneath it's eroding your trust in yourself. Major transitions are identity disruptions. Who am I now that this has changed? And when identity is unsettled, it's easier for someone else to define it for you. Narcissistic people are very comfortable defining other people's roles. They'll tell you who you are, what you should want, what's realistic for you, what's too much for you, and if you're already unsure, you might accept that definition without realizing you've outsourced your sense of self. Another reason transitions are so risky is that they often come with pressure to get it right. Society doesn't give us much grace during change. We're expected to adapt quickly, be positive, and keep moving forward. So when someone shows up with answers, structure, and confidence, it can feel like a lifeline. You may ignore the discomfort in your body because the narrative sounds good. You may silence your doubts because you don't want to appear ungrateful or incapable. Narcissistic individuals often frame their involvement as generosity. "I'm just trying to help. I'm doing this for your own good. No one else understands you the way I do." During a transition, that kind of language can feel especially powerful because you genuinely may feel misunderstood or unseen. The danger is that this help often comes with an expectation of loyalty, obedience, or emotional labor in return. What makes this particularly insidious is that these dynamics don't usually start with overt control. They start with alignment. We're on the same page. I get you. We're a team. And in a transition, being on a team feels comforting. It reduces the fear of doing it alone. But over time, the team becomes a hierarchy. And somehow, you're no longer sure how that happened. Transitions also tend to exhaust us. Decision fatigue is real. When everything in your life is changing, you're making more choices than usual, and your nervous system is working overtime. When you're tired, you're less likely to challenge inconsistencies, less likely to analyze red flags, less likely to say, "This doesn't feel right." You may prioritize peace over clarity, especially if chaos has already been present, and narcissistic people are very good at stepping into that exhaustion. They simplify things for you, but in a way that benefits them. Don't overthink it, just trust me. You're being too sensitive. Those phrases land differently when you're already overwhelmed. They can sound like relief instead of dismissal. Another piece that often gets overlooked is that transitions can bring up old wounds. Childhood patterns, attachment styles, unresolved trauma, they all tend to surface when our environment changes. If you grew up needing to adapt quickly, please others, or rely on unpredictable caregivers, transitions can unconsciously activate those survival strategies. And narcissistic people feel familiar in those moments, even if they're harmful. Familiarity is not the same as safety. But during transitions, we often confuse the two. The dynamic feels known, the emotional rhythm feels recognizable, and so we stay telling ourselves this is just part of the adjustment period, that once things settle, it'll get better. But here's the hard truth. Narcissistic relationships don't settle. They entrench. The longer you're in them, the harder it becomes to tell where your transition ended and their control began. I want to be very clear about something here. Being vulnerable during a transition does not mean you did something wrong. It means you're human. Life is not meant to be navigated in a constant state of certainty, but awareness matters. Understanding that transitions are high-risk periods helps you slow things down, ask better questions, and stay connected to your own internal voice. Support during transitions should expand you, not shrink you. It should encourage independence, not dependence. It should tolerate your uncertainty instead of exploiting it. Healthy people don't rush you to attach to them. They don't pressure you to trust them fully before you trust yourself. They don't position themselves as the answer to your discomfort. If you're in a transition right now, one of the most protective things you can do is resist urgency. Narcissistic dynamics thrive on speed, fast intimacy, fast commitment, fast trust. You're allowed to take your time. You're allowed to not know yet. You're allowed to say, "I need space to figure this out," because the goal of a transition is not to find someone to lean on forever. It's to arrive, slowly and imperfectly, at a new version of yourself that belongs to you. And the moment you realize that your uncertainty doesn't need to be filled by someone else is the moment their power over you begins to fade. After major transitions, one of the most dangerous windows of vulnerability comes during grief, loss, and trauma. And this is a hard one to talk about because grief already feels like enough. It's heavy, it's disorienting. It changes how you experience time, your body, your emotions, and even your sense of meaning. When you're grieving, you're not just sad, you're depleted. And depletion is a state narcissistic individuals are painfully good at exploiting. Grief strips away our emotional armor. Whether it's the death of a loved one, the end of a relationship, a betrayal, a miscarriage, a serious illness, or a financial collapse, loss puts the nervous system into survival mode. You're not operating from strength or clarity. You're operating from pain and shock. Your brain is flooded with stress hormones. Your sleep is disrupted. Your concentration is impaired. You may feel numb one moment and overwhelmed the next. In that state, discernment becomes harder, not because you're careless, but because your system is overwhelmed. During grief, people crave comfort. They crave understanding. They crave someone who will sit in the pain with them and not try to fix it or rush it away. And narcissistic individuals often show up appearing to offer exactly that. They can be intensely attentive in the beginning. They listen, they validate, they stay close. They may say things like, "No one else understands what you're going through," or "You don't have to be strong with me," or "I'm the only one who really gets you right now." When you're hurting, that level of focus can feel like a lifeline, but is the distinction that matters. Healthy support holds space for your pain without needing anything from it. Narcissistic support often collects your pain, it stores it, and eventually it uses it. In the early stages of grief, you may not notice that subtle shift. You're just relieved someone is there. You're relieved you don't have to explain yourself. You're relieved you're not alone. And because grief is isolating, because many people don't know how to show up for it consistently, you may cling to the person who does. Even if something feels off, you tell yourself you're too sensitive, too emotional, too fragile to judge clearly. Trauma also changes our threshold for behavior. Things you might normally question, boundary violations, emotional intensity, subtle control, you may overlook because you don't have the energy to address them. You're just trying to get through the day. Narcissistic people understand this exhaustion. They may frame their intrusiveness as care. I worry about you. I just want to protect you. You're not thinking clearly right now. Let me handle this. And because trauma often makes people doubt their own perceptions, that kind of takeover can feel like relief instead of a red flag. Another layer here is that grief often comes with a loss of identity. Who am I without this person, without this relationship, without this version of my life? When identity is fractured, people are more susceptible to external definition. A narcissistic individual may step into that void and begin shaping your story for you, how you should feel, how long you should grieve, what this loss means, and what you should do next. Over time, you may find yourself narrating your own experience through their lens. There's also the issue of urgency. Grief makes people desperate for stability. When everything feels shattered, you want something, anything, that feels solid. Narcissistic people often present themselves as that solid thing. They appear confident, certain, decisive. They offer answers when you're full of questions. And when your world feels like it's falling apart, certainty can feel safer than complexity. But grief is not linear, and it cannot be rushed. Anyone who pressures you to move on, to be grateful, or to attach quickly to them as a replacement for what you lost is not supporting your healing. They're bypassing it. And bypassing grief doesn't make it disappear. It just makes it easier for someone else to control the narrative. One of the most painful dynamics I see is when narcissistic individuals weaponize grief later on. What began as comfort becomes leverage. Your vulnerability becomes evidence against you. You're too emotional because of what you went through. You can't trust your judgment because you're still traumatized. After everything I did for you when you were falling apart, this is how you treat me? The very pain that brought you closer is now used to keep you stuck. Trauma bonding is especially powerful in these situations. When someone shows up during your darkest moments, the bond can feel unbreakable. You may feel indebted, loyal, afraid to leave because you associate them with survival. Your nervous system remembers them as safety, even if your mind is starting to see the damage. And breaking that bond can feel like another loss, one you may not feel capable of surviving. Grief also lowers tolerance for conflict. You may avoid setting boundaries because you don't want more stress. You may suppress your anger because it feels dangerous or overwhelming. Narcissistic people benefit from this. They thrive when you're unable to assert yourself, when you're afraid that saying no will cost you the only support you think you have, and so you stay quiet, you endure, you minimize. It's also important to acknowledge that grief can make people long for meaning. After loss, we often ask, why did this happen? What am I supposed to learn? Narcissistic individuals may insert themselves into that meaning-making process. They may frame themselves as part of your healing journey, as someone who came into your life for a reason. That narrative can make it incredibly hard to question the relationship without feeling like you're betraying your own growth. But healing is not about who saved you. It's about how you rebuilt yourself. Healthy support during grief allows your emotions to exist without judgment. It doesn't rush you. It doesn't center itself. It doesn't make your pain about their importance. It doesn't need to be the hero in your story. And most importantly, it doesn't punish you for eventually getting stronger. If you are grieving, one of the most protective things you can do is widen your support instead of narrowing it. Narcissistic dynamics thrive in isolation. Healing thrives in community, even if that community is small. No single person should be your only source of comfort, guidance, or reality checking during trauma. And if you're looking back and realizing that someone entered your life during a loss and slowly took over your emotional world, I want you to hear this clearly. That does not mean you're weak. It means you were hurting. And hurting people deserve care, not control. Grief is sacred. It's raw. It's personal. Anyone who uses it as a doorway into your life doesn't deserve permanent access to your heart, because real support helps you carry your pain, while narcissists turn it into a handle. Another critical window of vulnerability shows up during periods of low self-worth and self-doubt, and this one is especially tricky because it often doesn't look dramatic from the outside. There may be no big life event, no obvious loss, no visible crisis. On the surface, life might look fine, but internally, something has shifted. You're questioning yourself more. You're replaying conversations. You're second-guessing decisions that used to feel natural. And when self-trust erodes, narcissistic dynamics slide in quietly. Low self-worth doesn't usually announce itself. It creeps in after repeated disappointments, failures, rejections, criticism, or chronic invalidation. Maybe you didn't get the promotion. Maybe a relationship ended and you blamed yourself. Maybe you were criticized at work, compared to others, or subtly made to feel replaceable. Over time, these experiences chip away at your internal anchor. You start asking, what's wrong with me? Instead of, is this situation actually healthy? When self-doubt is present, people become more externally focused. You start scanning others for cues about your value. You listen more closely to feedback. You adjust yourself to fit expectations. And narcissistic individuals thrive in environments where people are hungry for validation. They are very good at offering oval in controlled doses, just enough to hook you, never enough to stabilize you. At first, it may feel like confidence returning. They compliment you, they notice you, they seem impressed by you in ways others haven't been. If you've been feeling invisible or inadequate, that attention can feel intoxicating. It can feel like proof that maybe you weren't the problem after all. But the validation is conditional. It's tied to performance, compliance, admiration, or emotional availability. What often follows is subtle erosion. The praise becomes inconsistent. The compliments are paired with helpful critiques. You're amazing, but you can be a little too sensitive. You're so capable, but you really need guidance. You're lucky you have someone who understands your flaws. When self-worth is already shaky, these mixed messages land deeply. You start trying harder, explaining more, apologizing for things that don't require apologies. Low self-worth makes people more tolerant of mistreatment, not because they like it, but because they internalize it. You may assume the problem is you. You may believe you're asking for too much, expecting too much, feeling too much. Narcissistic people reinforce this belief, often subtly. They frame your needs as burdens, your boundaries as selfishness, your emotions as overreactions. And here's where it becomes especially dangerous: self-doubt distorts reality testing. When someone gaslights you, denies things they said, minimizes harm, reframes events, you are more likely to accept their version if you already don't trust your own perception. You tell yourself, maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I'm being dramatic. Maybe I'm remembering it wrong. Over time, you begin outsourcing reality to the person who is actively distorting it. Another dynamic that shows up strongly during low self-worth is comparison. Narcissistic individuals often introduce subtle competition into relationships. They reference others. They talk about how other people admire them, challenge them, appreciate them more. If you're already feeling inadequate, those comparisons sting. You may work harder to prove your value, not realizing the goalposts will always move. People in this state also tend to over-explain, overgive, overfunction. You may feel a constant need to justify your feelings, your choices, your reactions. Narcissistic people benefit from this imbalance. The more you explain, the more they position themselves as the judge. The more you try to earn understanding, the more power they hold. Low self-worth also blurs boundaries. You may tolerate behaviors you would normally walk away from, disrespect, inconsistency, emotional withdrawal, because you fear being alone or rejected. Narcissistic individuals often test boundaries early. If you don't push back, they escalate, not suddenly but gradually. And because the erosion is slow, you don't notice how far you've drifted from what once felt acceptable. Another painful piece is that people with low self-worth often blame themselves for the narcissist's behavior. If the narcissist withdraws affection, you assume you did something wrong. If they become critical, you assume you deserve it. If they become distant, you assume you're not enough. This keeps you locked in a cycle of self-correction rather than self-protection. It's also important to recognize that many people who struggle with self-worth grew up in environments where love was conditional, where approval had to be earned, where criticism outweighed affirmation. In those cases, narcissistic dynamics don't just feel familiar, they feel normal. The emotional pattern clicks into place. You know how to survive it even if it hurts. Familiarity again gets mistaken for safety. Narcissistic individuals often position themselves as the authority on your worth. They decide when you're good enough, when you're disappointing, when you've improved. And if you've been doubting yourself, that authority can feel grounding at first. But the cost is enormous. You slowly lose the ability to self-validate. Your mood becomes tied to their approval. Your sense of self fluctuates based on how they treat you that day. And here's something that doesn't get said enough. Low self-worth does not mean you lack value. It means your value has been obscured by experiences, by messages, by people who benefited from you not seeing it clearly. Narcissistic individuals don't create your insecurity from scratch. They locate it, and then they cultivate it. Recovery from this dynamic isn't about becoming arrogant or invulnerable. It's about rebuilding self-trust, learning to take your own reactions seriously again, letting discomfort be information instead of something to override, recognizing that respect does not require perfection, and love does not require shrinking. Healthy relationships do not make you feel like you're constantly being evaluated. They don't keep you guessing where you stand. They don't reward you for self-abandonment. If someone's presence consistently makes you feel smaller, more anxious, more unsure of yourself, that's not growth. It's erosion. If you're in a phase of low self-worth right now, the most protective move you can make is to slow down your emotional commitments. Don't hand over authority for your value to someone else. Seek spaces where you are allowed to exist without proving yourself, where mistakes don't cost you connection, where you're not required to perform gratitude for basic decency. Because the moment you stop asking, "Am I enough for them?" and start asking, "How do I feel around them?" is the moment the power dynamic begins to shift. And narcissists lose their grip the instant you remember that your worth is not something they get to decide. Another period of heightened vulnerability shows up during identity formation stages, times in life when you are actively figuring out who you are, what you value, and how you want to move through the world. This often happens in adolescence and early adulthood, but it doesn't end there. Midlife transitions, cultural shifts, parenthood, immigration, spiritual changes, any phase where your sense of self is under construction can reopen this window. And when identity is still forming, narcissistic people don't just enter your life, they shape it. When you're in an identity-building phase, you're experimenting. You're trying on roles, beliefs, goals, and relationships. You're asking questions like, is this me? Do I belong here? What kind of life do I want? That curiosity is healthy. It's how people grow. But it also means your boundaries may be more flexible, your standards less defined, and your confidence in your own preferences still developing. Narcissistic individuals are drawn to this openness. They don't want to meet someone who is fully formed and self-directed. They want someone who is still malleable, someone whose values can be influenced, someone who hasn't yet learned to say, "No, that doesn't work for me." In these stages, narcissists often present themselves as guides, mentors, romantic partners, or authority figures who seem worldly, confident, and certain. Certainty is incredibly attractive when you're still figuring things out. When someone says, "I know who you are," or "I see your potential," it can feel validating, even profound. You may interpret their intensity as insight, their control as leadership, their opinions as wisdom. And because you're still building your own internal framework, you may rely on theirs. Over time, what begins as influence becomes definition. They begin telling you what you should want, who you should be friends with, what success looks like, what is acceptable, what is embarrassing, what is realistic for someone like you. And because your identity isn't fully anchored yet, you may absorb these messages without realizing how much of yourself you're giving up in the process. Early adulthood is especially vulnerable because it's often the first time people are making major decisions independently. Careers, relationships, lifestyles, belief systems. There's pressure to get it right, to not waste time, to prove competence. Narcissistic people take advantage of that urgency. They may rush commitment, discourage exploration, or frame alternative paths as failures. This is the smart choice. This is how grown-ups do it. You don't want to mess this up. Identity formation also involves separation, learning where you end and others begin. Narcissistic individuals resist that separation. They blur boundaries. They encourage enmeshment. We're the same. We don't need anyone else. You're different from other people. At first, that closeness can feel special, but slowly, it isolates you from perspectives that might challenge their influence. Another layer here is belonging. Identity formation is deeply tied to social acceptance. People want to feel chosen, seen, included. Narcissistic individuals exploit this need by positioning themselves as gatekeepers to belonging. They may introduce you to a group, a lifestyle, or a worldview, but only through them. Your access becomes conditional. If you disagree, you risk exclusion. So you comply, you adapt, you shrink parts of yourself to stay connected. Midlife identity shifts can be just as risky. When people reassess their lives, careers, marriages, values, they may feel unmoored. Who am I if this role no longer fits? Narcissistic individuals can step into that uncertainty and offer a new identity, the enlightened one, the finally awakened one, the special one who sees things others don't. That narrative can feel empowering, especially if you've felt stuck or unseen. But again, it often comes with rigid rules and subtle control. In identity formation phases, people may also tolerate disrespect because they believe discomfort is part of growth. Narcissistic individuals exploit that idea. They frame criticism as truth, control as discipline, and emotional harm as lessons. And because you're trying to become someone better, wiser, stronger, you may endure things that are actually undermining your development. Another important piece is that during these stages, people often lack a reference point for healthy relationships. If you haven't yet experienced consistent respect, mutuality, and emotional safety, you may not recognize their absence. Narcissistic dynamics can feel intense, meaningful, even transformative, because intensity is mistaken for depth. Control is mistaken for care. Possession is mistaken for love. And once a narcissistic person has had a hand in shaping your identity, leaving becomes harder. You may fear that without them, you won't know who you are, that the self you've built is somehow dependent on their approval or presence. This is one of the most painful traps, believing that the person who constrained you is also the one who gave you form. But identity is not something someone else gives you. It's something you uncover, layer by layer, through experience, reflection, and choice. Anyone who demands that you become a smaller, quieter, more compliant version of yourself in order to stay connected is not supporting your growth. Healthy relationships during identity formation encourage exploration. They allow contradiction. They don't punish change. They don't require you to freeze yourself in a role that benefits them. They understand that becoming yourself is an evolving process, not a fixed destination. If you're in a phase of identity questioning right now, the most protective thing you can do is stay curious about yourself, not about how well you're fitting someone else's expectations. Notice where you feel expansive versus constricted. Notice who celebrates your autonomy instead of feeling threatened by it. Notice who can tolerate your evolution without trying to control all the outcome. Because the people who truly support your growth don't try to define you. They make room for you to define yourself. And the moment you realize that your identity belongs to you alone is the moment their influence starts to dissolve. One of the most counterintuitive periods of vulnerability comes not when things are falling apart, but when things are going well. Periods of success, visibility, growth, or achievement are often assumed to be protective. We tell ourselves, I'm confident now, I'm strong now, I know who I am. And yet, these are some of the moments when narcissistic individuals become especially interested in you. Not because you need them, but because they want something from you. Success changes how you're seen. It brings attention, opportunity, and access. Whether it's a promotion, creative recognition, financial stability, public visibility, or personal growth, success shifts your position in the world, and narcissistic people are highly attuned to shifts in power, status, and resources. They notice who is rising, they notice who is becoming valuable, and they move toward it. During periods of success, people are often more open, more generous, more trusting. You may feel proud of yourself, relieved, energized. You may be less guarded because you're not in survival mode. You're not scanning for danger, and that openness, while healthy in many ways, can make you less likely to question someone's motives, especially if they appear supportive. Narcissistic individuals often enter during these phases as admirers. They praise your work, they celebrate your wins, they seem impressed, inspired, even humbled by your success. They may end themselves as allies, collaborators, partners, or confidants. And because you're not used to being celebrated, or because you've worked hard to get here, that admiration can feel validating. But admiration from a narcissistic person is rarely just appreciation. It's assessment. They're asking themselves, what can I get from this? Access, status, validation, control, association. They don't just see you, they see what being close to you can do for them. One of the subtle dangers of success is that it can trigger guilt. Many people feel uncomfortable outgrowing others. They downplay achievements. They overshare credit. They shrink themselves to avoid seeming arrogant. Narcissistic individuals exploit this humility. They may subtly compete with you, undermine you, or insert themselves into your achievements while framing it as teamwork. Over time, you may find that your success feels less like yours and more like something you're managing to protect. Another vulnerability during success is overextension. When opportunities increase, demands increase. You're busier, you're stretched. You may say yes more than you should. Narcissistic individuals take advantage of that exhaustion. They push boundaries. They expect availability. They become entitled to your time, energy, and emotional labor, often without offering genuine support in return. There's also the issue of visibility. Being seen can be exhilarating, but it can also be destabilizing. You may receive feedback, praise, criticism, and attention from many directions. That noise can make it harder to hear your own internal voice. Narcissistic individuals may insert themselves as interpreters of that feedback. They're jealous of you. They don't understand you like I do. You need to be careful. People are threatened by you. These statements can isolate you while masquerading as protection. Success can also activate old wounds. If you grew up being criticized, minimized, or punished for standing out, achievement may feel unsafe on a nervous system level. Narcissistic individuals may unconsciously mirror those early dynamics, alternating between praise and punishment. They build you up, then cut you down. And because part of you doesn't feel fully deserving of success, you may accept that volatility as normal. Another common pattern is appropriation. Narcissistic people often attach themselves to successful individuals and slowly blur the lines of ownership. Your ideas become our ideas. Your work becomes our work. Your platform becomes our platform. At first, this may feel collaborative, but over time, you may notice that your autonomy is shrinking while their visibility grows. And if you ever try to assert boundaries or reclaim your space, the backlash can be intense. Narcissistic individuals often feel entitled to the benefits of your success. When that entitlement is challenged, they may become critical, dismissive, or punitive. They may accuse you of changing, becoming selfish, or forgetting where you came from. Success becomes the very thing they use to shame you. Another danger zone is when success creates imbalance in relationships. If you're growing faster than someone else, earning more, being recognized more, narcissistic individuals may respond with covert resentment. They may appear supportive while subtly undermining your confidence. Backhanded compliments, passive, aggressive comments, minimization. You may find yourself dimming your light to keep the peace, not realizing how much that costs you over time. It's also important to acknowledge that success can increase isolation. People may relate to you differently. Some relationships fall away. That loneliness can make the attention of a narcissistic individual feel grounding, even if it's unhealthy. They may present themselves as the one person who truly understands your pressure, your responsibility, your uniqueness. That narrative can make it very hard to see how controlling the dynamic has become. What often gets overlooked is that narcissistic people don't just target vulnerability and pain. They target vulnerability and expansion. Growth requires openness. It requires risk. It requires visibility. And anyone who tries to control you during growth is not protecting you, they're recontaining you. Healthy support during success looks very different. It doesn't compete with you. It doesn't need credit. It doesn't make your achievements about their sacrifice. It doesn't punish you for outgrowing old versions of yourself. Healthy people can celebrate you without needing to own you. If you're in a phase of success right now, one of the most protective questions you can ask is, who benefits from my growth and who feels threatened by it? Notice who respects your boundaries as your life expands. Notice who encourages rest instead of extraction. Notice who can sit with your success without needing to insert themselves into it, because your success is not an invitation to be consumed. And the moment you stop apologizing for your growth is the moment narcissists lose access to your shine. The final period of vulnerability I want to talk about is one that is often praised, rewarded, and even moralized in our culture. The phase when you are deeply empathetic, highly giving, and strongly oriented toward helping, fixing, or healing others. This is the vulnerability almost no one warns you about, because on the surface it looks like goodness. It looks like kindness. It looks like emotional maturity. But in the presence of narcissistic people, it can become a liability. Many people enter this phase after growth, after therapy, after spiritual exploration, after surviving hardship. You've learned to understand emotions. You've learned compassion. You've learned to sit with discomfort. You may pride yourself on being patient, understanding, and fair. And those are real strengths. But narcissistic individuals don't see empathy as a value. They see it as an access point. When you are over-empathetic, you give people the benefit of the doubt even when the evidence doesn't support it. You contextualize harmful behavior. You look for the wound behind the action. You say things like, they're acting this way because they're insecure, or they've had a hard life, or they don't mean it that way. Empathy becomes a lens through which red flags are softened. Narcissistic people thrive in this environment because they are very skilled at presenting themselves as wounded. They tell stories of being misunderstood, mistreated, unappreciated. They frame themselves as victims of other people's cruelty or ignorance. And if you are someone who is naturally compassionate, your instinct is to lean in, not step back. You want to help. You want to be the exception. You want to be one who finally understands them. Overgiving often comes with over-responsibility. You may feel responsible for other people's emotions, reactions, and healing. You may believe that if you just communicate better, love harder, or stay calmer, the relationship will improve. Narcissistic individuals quietly reinforce this belief. They may imply that their behavior is a response to your tone, your timing, your sensitivity, and because you value accountability, you take that feedback seriously, without noticing that accountability is flowing in only one direction. This is where compassion gets confused with self-erasure. You begin editing yourself to accommodate someone else's fragility. You walk on eggshells. You choose your words carefully. You suppress your needs because they're going through so much. Over time, the relationship becomes centered around their pain, their triggers, their moods. Your inner world becomes secondary. Another danger in this phase is the belief that love heals everything. That if you show enough understanding, people will change. That your empathy will reach places no one else could. Narcissistic people benefit enormously from this belief because it keeps you invested long past the point where evidence suggests change is unlikely. They may even praise your empathy while exploiting it. You're the only one who has ever understood me. That statement can feel meaningful, but it's also a warning sign. Empathetic people often struggle with anger. They may see anger as unkind or dangerous. They may prioritize harmony over honesty. Narcissistic individuals exploit this avoidance of conflict. They push boundaries knowing you are unlikely to confront them directly. And if you do express anger, they may reframe it as cruelty, insensitivity, or emotional abuse, causing you to retreat back into guilt and self-doubt. There's also a subtle moral trap here. Overgiving people often tie their identity to being good, to being fair, to being emotionally evolved. Narcissistic individuals can weaponize that identity. They may suggest that setting boundaries is selfish, that leaving is cruel, that holding them accountable is abandonment. And because you don't want to be the villain, you stay, you endure, you explain. Many highly empathetic people grew up in environments where they had to attune to others to stay safe, where they learned early to read moods, anticipate needs, and manage emotional climates. In adulthood, this skill can look like emotional intelligence. But with narcissistic people, it becomes a reenactment. You're back in a familiar role, monitoring, soothing, stabilizing, while your own needs remain unmet. Another risk during this phase is spiritual bypassing. Phrases like hurt people, everyone is doing the best they can, or love means unconditional acceptance can be twisted into excuses for ongoing harm. Narcissistic individuals often adopt therapeutic or spiritual language to justify their behavior, and if you're committed to growth, you may mistake insight for accountability. But understanding why someone behaves a certain way does not obligate you to tolerate it. Empathy without boundaries is not compassion, it's self-abandonment. And narcissistic dynamics depend on your willingness to abandon yourself for the sake of keeping the peace. Healthy relationships do not require you to constantly translate, excuse, or absorb someone else's emotional fallout. They don't ask you to be endlessly patient while receiving little in return. They don't turn your kindness into a contract. If you are in a phase of deep empathy right now, one of the most important questions you can ask is not, why are they like this? But how is this affecting me? Notice how your body feels around them. Notice whether your nervous system relaxes or stays on high alert. Notice whether your empathy is reciprocated or merely consumed. Boundaries are not punishments. They are information. They tell others how to be in your life in a way that doesn't cost you your well-being. Narcissistic people often react badly to boundaries because boundaries interrupt access, and access is what they're after. You are allowed to be kind and discerning at the same time. You are allowed to care deeply without sacrificing yourself. You are allowed to walk away from someone's pain if they keep handing it to you as a responsibility instead of carrying it themselves. Because empathy should never be the reason you disappear from your own life. And the moment your compassion includes you is the moment narcissists lose their hold.